So welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another replay battle, and this one is going to be a team free-for-all on the grassy plain, although while the map is a little bit plain, the army compositions that I've seen from a cursory glance are anything but. It is worth saying that in the near future I hope to be trying out something different in Total War, which I hope goes down well, but that is something which I'll give its... I think I'll announce that in its own video actually. I think that'll be the easiest way of doing things rather than just bolting it onto the start of one of these. But we'll start off with the army compositions here, and as you can see, this is a very... well, there is a focus to this Rohan army that's been made by Master Blaster, and this is going to be... well, big thank you to him, obviously, for sending me the replay. There are actually a couple of units way back there as well, so we'll go through all of his army. I've got a couple of units of Eastmark Scouts over here, which are the lowest tier of Rohan cavalry. Now, these scout units, there aren't many of them. The only other one that comes to mind is the 4 Linden Scouts from Linden, and they can hide anywhere. They are one of the few sort of pure melee cavalry units that can hide anywhere. There are a few units of mounted rangers which can also do that on horseback, but can be potentially quite useful to catch people unawares, because these units still can inflict quite a lot of damage off the charge, but they are of course very fragile. They cannot last in sustained fighting, and the ROHIRRIM ones may have a shield, but they're still not great at taking ranged fire either. Meanwhile, we shall go through all of his army, which, to be honest with you, most of the ROHIRRIM cavalry is going to be present here, so we can see the Riddermark skirmishers, a big part of the Rohan cavalry, because they are, of course, very effective melee cavalry units as well as being javelin cavalry, so this is really the safeguard you need for your very extensive line of lancers. The one infantry unit I believe Master Blaster has brought is the Meduzeld Guard as well, so an expensive one, but very good melee infantry, as well as being very powerful javelins, of course. We have the red shield... no, we're not the red shield. Well, yes, the red shield of Erkenbrand, if I can just sort of get to a place, yeah. And they are, again, melee cavalry, bow cavalry hybrids. And their position in the game has been debated back and forth. I do think that they are in a better place now than they were at one point. At one point they were just an abject waste of money. Now, though, if you're going for a very skirmish-heavy approach with your cavalry, they are a good addition, because if they do get caught by enemy cavalry, they can certainly hold their own with their melee cavalry stats, but also they are very tough at range as well, which a lot of Rohan's cavalry maybe lacks a little bit in terms of their survivability, compared to probably their nearest comparison in Khan, but the Red Shields are certainly not one of those units. We have the Riders of the Fold, which are a very efficient horse archer unit. Obviously there was a time back in the, well, the Third Age sort of meta as a whole, that I believe these guys were just not very good either, a waste of money. Not in Reforged so much, but definitely in the vanilla version of the mod. But yeah, definitely in a much better place than they were back then. Arid of Aldberg, which are a very good Lancer cavalry, single HP, but still very high charge, very good. The most expensive of the sort of non-multiple HP units that Rohan can bring. More Riders of the Fold. It's difficult to tell where one unit ends and another unit begins here. We've got some more Riders of the Fold, Riders of the Fold. There's got to be more than one unit of Arid of Aldberg in here as well, which is unsurprising. Definitely a lot of money sunk into this cavalry here. There's also some First Marshal's Bodyguard, which are a multiple HP Lancer unit, which there are quite a few units of this type in the game. And of course, Rohan's cavalry tends to be a little bit swifter than the more heavily armoured cavalry factions that are sort of with them. Factions like Dol Amroth or Arnor, well, not Arnor, Arthedain, that sort of thing, they tend to rely a little bit more on their heavy armour and their survivability. Rohan, a little bit swifter around the battlefield, but then they do sort of pay for this a little bit in terms of their survivability. There's some Eastmark horse archers back there, so these slightly cheaper horse archers. Of course, the Sons of Yorl are here in such a cavalry-heavy army. I think that's just about everything. There might be some Riddermark cavalry units in here as well, but it is pretty difficult to tell. There's some more Riddermark skirmishers in there also. And the faction that's with him is actually Khan, so Starkiller X from the Mob clan is going to be joining him. Now, he hasn't gone quite so cavalry heavy, but you can still see that this team is going to be incredibly reliant on their cavalry. It could cause a huge amount of chaos in this battle, which I'm looking forward to. We've got some Brotherhood of the Lance, which are, of course... this is not the General's Bodyguard unit, but this is a single HP Lancer cavalry unit, very much a glass cannon, very powerful off the charge, but not going to last too long under ranged fire or in a sustained fight. This is the General's Bodyguard unit, the General there with his big glaive. We can see the Variag Cataphracts, so another Knight unit, obviously very strong all around. A little bit slower than the rest of the Khandish cavalry, but even so, still very effective. The Nurad Windblades, which are a very, very effective melee cavalry unit. Probably, in terms of the non-warg units, they're probably the one you want to get into a fight with the least. You know, I think the champions of the White Hand and the Melkor's Chosen will probably be able to beat them, but the Nurad Windblades, very little else is going to want to get into a melee with them, and I think due to their very high skill and very high damage, even the Haven Knights and the Witch Realm Inquisitors would probably want to think twice if they weren't being backed up by some sort of ranged fire, of course. Lack of a shield on the Windblades back there. We've got the Variag Windriders as well, so more melee cavalry unit that is without a shield, but very, very good on the attack. And over here we have some Variag Horse Archers, again, not too much of a surprise there. And on the other side there's more Variag Horse Archers and more Nurad Windblades. He's gone for 2 units of Windblades, that's very expensive, but we'll see how that goes. There's also 2 Black Powder Hwatchers, so this is a very weird army composition indeed. But the usually inaccurate Black Powder Hwatchers should be able to land more hits with 2 of them at the very least. A couple of units, well, I think, yep, just 2 units of Variag Bowmen, and then some Nomadic Light Infantry to sort of try and protect those Bowmen and the pieces of siege from any sort of attack. And it looks as though the cavalry forces are going to be going over here to face off against Baconfish 302, who is playing as Mirkwood, and his ally Muro, who is playing as Lothlorien. That's a good choice, actually. That much cavalry, the elves often have a bit of an issue covering all their angles, and certainly some of the cavalry you'd imagine is going to be able to slip through the cracks if Rohan and Khan go full attack onto the elves. The Rohirrim Amon Lank, however, are very good in a sustained fight against those units. They are, of course, spear cavalry with very high skill. The Windblades should be able to defeat them, however, but everything else would probably struggle a little bit. Even the Knights wouldn't want to get involved with them too much, because they would probably take losses that would not be good later on in the battle. The Yaragwe Inanwaith, which are previously known as the Elder Royal Council, so the best archer unit that Mirkwood can bring. Thranduil is in this unit over here, of course, and then a couple of units of Megal E Erin, some Thrandrim E Erin, or Thandrim E Erin I should say, and then some Hiri Peng. There's certainly some Thurn E Tower, maybe some Hethel E Tower, and Delupeng E Emondwia hidden as well. We might even get to see the Gwath E Erin Gallen, of course, the Mirkwood Assassins. And then over here we can have a look at Lothlorien. Again, probably some hidden units, maybe not quite to the same extent that Merc would have them, but Lothlorien still have quite a few units that can hide, like the Sindar Blade Masters. At the front we've got some Lothlorien Archers. We've actually got the Karos Galadhon's Guardians over here, which is a bold move in a free-for-all, especially because forming up a line and hoping that your enemies only come at you from one direction is probably not something that's going to happen in a free-for-all, but provided they can keep their formation, they are brutally effective pikes. And then some Lothlorien blades here, so some very effective infantry indeed, although I worry for them if the cavalry comes for them. A couple of units of AP Lothlorien warriors, some Ethel Tirith over here on the flank, and then finally the cavalry contingent made up of a single unit of Lothlorien Mounted Company and the Galathrim Riders, one of the most effective bow cavalry units in the game. Now over here, this is a very, should we say, provocative sort of deployment. This is the sort of thing which would annoy me a little bit if I were playing in this battle. I would immediately suggest that everyone should crush them for trying to cowardly hide at the back of the map. But Fuzzy Banjo over here is playing as Mordor, especially seeing as they're the Orcs. You imagine the Orcs would want to get stuck in right away, but you've got some Orc fodder, some Morannon infantry here at the front, and then just in behind we can see some Minas Morgul bodyguard, Morannon guard, and some Minas Morgul chosen and halberds. Temple Executioners, 2 units of Temple Executioners actually, so he's gone for a lot of expensive units. Malcolm's chosen Temple Inquisitors, and then at the back he's got his archer contingent. Interesting army with quite a few expensive units to be honest, and very odd alliance as well with Lyndon. Revan of Korriban is over here. The Noldorin Horse Lords are of course a very effective knight unit. Should be able to hold their own against most other cavalry units on the field today. Lithlon Lancers as well, which are the Lance Cavalry Javelin Cavalry hybrid. Lyndon of course got plenty of hybrid units in their midst. Mithlon Swordmasters, 2 units of Harlinden Infantry, 4 Linden Pikemen as well as 4 Linden Marines covering the front, as well as some Harlinden Guard, and a catapult. And then the final army, we can see that Harada over here, because of the Mumakil, and Harada being played by Stewed Balrog, and he's got a lot of cavalry as well actually, so he's got some Southron Lancers as well as some Mounted Serpent Guard, and some Black Serpents. So this is a very mounted heavy Haradrim build at the very least. That might be a problem for Lyndon actually if they're not prepared for this sort of thing. Haradrim archers and spearmen, of course, they have to cut corners on their infantry somewhere with that much cavalry, but they do still have some dismounted Serpent Guard, and they do have some Trollmen, Demons of the Desert, and the Champions of Nafarat, so some individual units of quality, but their infantry force is certainly rather small, all things considered. And then finally, the Dwarves of Khazad-dûm, played by Colton W37. He's got some Orc Hunters at the front, full line of warriors of Khazad-dûm. And over on the flank, he's got some 1st Legion pikes and some sentries. Ooh, hello. Mixture of units down here, some hammers, Sons of the Fallen, and some 4th Legion. Also some Khazad-dûm Reclaimers, some Mithril Guard, some 2nd Legion Axe Guard, and some 3rd Legion infantry. So all around a pretty well-rounded dwarven force, and obviously he's going to take care of most of the infantry force for this team, you'd imagine, with that much in terms of Khandish cavalry. But let's begin and see what happens here. I would imagine the dwarves are probably not going to want to attack into the ROHIRRIM cavalry force, but we shall see. This is going to be an interesting little microcosm. I would imagine it's going to be Khand and Rohan against the elves, so the cavalry forces against the elves. And based on how these battles usually turn into a couple of 2v2s, that would kind of suggest that Mordor and Lindon would be going up against Harad and Khazad-dûm. Meanwhile, the Hwacha pouring its fire in over here. I really don't know why it causes that camera rumble, but immediately Mirkwood is not going to be trying to engage with that enormous force of cavalry, understandably. A few casualties, a few individual units being lost, and of course individual elven unit models are much more important than with other factions, so even grazing hits from those black powder Hwachas are going to be very much useful when the fighting starts. Not sure what Mirkwood is going to do at this point. 3 elven factions on the field today though. But Mirkwood is moving over, I think, as well. Lothlorien is going to be joining them. They're going to have to try and form up a united front to try and cover all their angles here, because that is a lot of cavalry. Which is expected when, perhaps when Rohan and Khand band together. But to this extent, I mean, nearly Rohan's entire force is made up of cavalry. We shall see. What's going on over here? This is a very... I don't like it when people try and hide at the back in a free-for-all, because it's really just a sign that you're hoping that the others will bleed themselves out on one another so you can just swoop in for the victory. So this team needs to redeem themselves in my eyes at this point in time, and not just hang around at the back, although fortunately it looks as though Lindon is going to be leading the way towards Harad's lines, which is going to be a much needed thing for this battle to really start heating up. This manoeuvring phase is interesting thus far, because Rohan and Khand are certainly wanting to go after the elves, which again is understandable. Although how they go about this is going to be rather interesting. I'm not sure what they're doing at this point, although it looks as though they're actually splitting their forces at this point. And between Khazad-dûm and Khand and the elves, I'm not sure I agree with that from a strategic point of view. I think they'd be much better off trying to focus on the elves. Because the worst case scenario here would be if the elves and this force over here then decided to try and crush this army between them both. And then that, of course, that would leave the team that parked themselves right at the back of the map in prime position to win the battle. We shall see. Honestly, if that's how it works out, I wouldn't even be too mad about the Lindon and Mordor team winning, because it would be everyone else's fault essentially for allowing that to happen. Ered Valberg, so again the Rohan cavalry sort of shifting around, the elves forming up a united front. Might have been a good idea to try and rush them down with all this cavalry, because I don't think they would have been able to withstand that all that easily. I mean, these Wind Riders are not Lancer cavalry, so they won't be able to do too much damage. Now, I don't believe, when we had a cursory glance over here, yes, they don't have any siege, which does mean, of course, that the 2 Black Powder Hwachas are going to have free reign on this dwarven front line. Some of their forces are very tightly packed together as well, so it's a smaller target, but any rocket that does hit them is going to deal some significant damage. What are stakes on the floor here? It's a pretty neat formation that he's set up, but whether it will be effective or not, we shall see. Oh, hello. What's going on over here? Well, the Lothlorien Mounted Company and the Galatharim Riders are harassing the Lindon and Mordor forces. It is going to be the Noldor and Horse Lords moving forward on their own. This is a very ill-judged advance, I think, because provided the Lothlorien player is on the ball, which it doesn't... That was a very weird sort of jink. They could have caught some of them then, but yeah, they got far too close. And the Noldor and Horse Lords do not have a shield, of course, which... And also their armour isn't as high as some of the other knights either, so while they may be fantastic in melee, and off the charge, they can struggle a little bit more than the other knights when it comes to trying to deal with ranged fire. Meanwhile, you can see over here that the Black Powder Watcher is now firing away. I'm not sure if a single rocket would be enough to kill a Mumakil if it landed. It's unlikely that we'll get to see that anyway. But also the ROHIRRIM charging forth, and I mean at this point with how the army is moving as a whole, this is the chance for the Rohan cavalry to get some really nasty charges off. Also the skirmish cavalry is going to be pretty useful against the elves while they're not able to return fire. And at this point the Sylvan Rangers, this is far too good a target to pass up, and indeed the Arid of Aldberg leading the way. They are charging in somewhat of a column formation though, so it wasn't too effective. You really want to spread your cavalry out if you want to do that, and at this point of course they are very much alerted to the Rohan cavalry's position. That wasn't the finest piece of play here from the Rohan cavalry force. It could have been devastating, but in the end it turned out to be very much a waste of time. And now the Lothlorien cavalry is also over here backing up the ROHIRRIM Amon Lank, and they're going to be chasing the Rohan cavalry off. Meanwhile, what's going on over here? Lindon and Mordor are instead going to posture up against the Elven forces over here, and at this point the one problem the Elven Alliance does have over here, the Sylvan Elf Alliance I should say, is that they are sandwiched between two forces somewhat, and they can't really organise because they need to put up a good front against the cavalry. Otherwise they'll just have gaps all throughout their line and then they'll be charged to death. Meanwhile, the full force of Mordor and Lindon is coming over here, so at this point Muro and Baconfish need to engage in some diplomacy and try and convince Rohan to back off, I think. If they don't, then they are certainly going to be the first team to fall. Meanwhile, let's go and see what's happening over here. Not a great deal in terms of casualties thus far, so I don't think the Watchers have truly laid down a marker. I mean, you can see some of the rockets are still coming in. You can see how wide their firing arc is. They are getting individual kills, which will soften the Dwarven infantry line up. It'll be interesting to see how that works out. Of course, at this point, trying to sort of weaken this front line is going to be quite important, because of course the cavalry forces of Khan and Rohan are going to have to try and circumvent all of this Dwarven front line. And of course the back lines will largely be defended by Harad, although most of this is Lancers. It will still be a bit of a pain to get in and around, particularly when you've got the really high damage stuff like the Khazad-dûm Reclaimers and the Demons of the Desert here to defend. There is also the Mumakil, which are a bit of a wild card at this point, although the lack of infantry on the part of Khan and Rohan probably means they won't be able to use their line breaking abilities to quite the same extent that they usually do. Meanwhile over here I would place this fight, I mean if I just looked at the factions and this was a sort of fully even fight, I would always back Lindon and Mordor in this situation, because they cover for one another's weaknesses quite well, and Lindon especially are a pretty effective faction in the right hands. And now of course we see the catapult coming in, which is going to deal some more damage to the Mirkwood infantry. Although I do believe that the sheer amount of archers that the Sylvan Elf Alliance has does mean that Lindon and Mordor would honestly be much better off if they just tried to charge in and overwhelm the elves at this point, because Lindon is not going to win this skirmish fight. There are ways and means that you can make up for Lindon's discrepancies at range, but against this level of skirmish pressure they are going to be in a really bad way. They really want to get in close and start to use their javelins and hopefully sort of try and leverage the numbers that Mordor have brought, but at this point I'm not entirely certain that they've gone about this in the right way. They do have the catapult though, so trying to use that to its full effect might be a good thing. Still, we've yet to see sort of a true melee fight start. And there's a lot of Mirkwood skirmishers, which you always expect, but this is probably even more so than average that Mirkwood bring. And of course Lothlorien accenting that quite nicely as well. It's not going to be easy to utilise the cavalry here. I would still certainly put the mounted fight in favour of Lindon and Mordor, because stuff like the Melkor's Chosen and Temple Inquisitors are just destroyers of worlds. In a cav-to-cav fight, even the ROHIRRIM Amon Lank wouldn't be able to stand up to those kinds of units. Especially not when you see the Lothlorien cavalry is sort of going off in a different direction, perhaps to try and go around this way and go on the attack, which would be an interesting move. Mordor slowly but surely is moving forward, but they're taking arrow fire all the while, although admittedly it is on their units that they can afford to lose a little bit more, so maybe this is a good thing for Mordor. Some Mithlon Lance as well. The Olag High are going to be a problem for the elves, trying to deal with the trolls. Trolls can inflict such heavy damage on units of the like that the elves tend to rely on. There's a lot of 30 tower over here. Not body piercing, of course, but still a very, very good standard mainline archer for them. Kind of the equivalent of the Eldar Quinga from Imladris, only they can hide and they have a higher missile damage. Mirkwood do rely a little bit more on their bowmen. Heftily Tower moving forward now as well, so again another hidden unit that Mirkwood could bring. Their dual wielding axes. Very good on the attack. They should be able to carve their way through the vast majority of these basic orc units pretty easily, honestly. Especially when they're being backed up by Lothlorien. Lothlorien's high damage will serve them quite well, provided they can avoid the extreme damage that comes in from Linden's hand-thrown projectiles. I'm just keeping an eye on the minimap over there to see when when Rohan make their move, because of course it would be right at the same... Actually, you know what? We're going to turn it down. Of course it would be right at the same time as this engagement is happening. Look at that lag. Meanwhile, we can see the Moranon infantry colliding with the Heftily Tower. Heftily Tower should be fine here, provided they don't spread themselves out too thinly and allow themselves to be overwhelmed. And the Megali Erin as well. They are under range 5. They should be able to beat Orc Fodder without any trouble at all. And of course Lothlorien are capable of dealing hefty amounts of damage in melee. Of all of the Elven factions, they can really put a hurting on you in melee very, very quickly. It's the thing which really sets them apart. But Linden are coming forward, and they have their pikes, their sword masters, and their Harlanding infantry. Very much a winning combination, although usually the Harlanding infantry can rely on themselves to being the sort of more skillful, more cost-effective infantry in a fight, but not against the Lothlorien blades. The Lothlorien blades will send them packing, especially when they've got a pretty nice tar pit unit in the shape of the Sylvan Staff Masters right in front of them. Now let's go and see what's happening over here. We can actually see that the Southron Lancers are going up against the Aerid of Aldberg. Now, the Aerid certainly got the more effective charge off, and they are the better unit overall. The Southron Lancers are the lower tier of Lancer that Harad can bring. And this is going to bode pretty badly for them. They are going to lose this fight, although, honestly, with all of the Horse Archers firing in, this is honestly probably getting more friendly fire than it is landing decisive shots on the Southrons. So this is probably a good thing for Harad, all things considered. Although their cavalry is really going to struggle against this amount of Rohan pressure. But provided they can blunt Rohan a little bit here, Khand are going to be in a pretty bad place against the Dwarven infantry. Let's go back over here. We're probably going to be going at slow motion for a little while the two fights are happening at once. That's how it tends to happen in team free-for-alls. Heftily Tower moving in, another unit of Heftily Tower. The Aradirith Amon Lank, which obviously are very much a mainstay in the Mirkwood force with their AP in melee. I do worry a little bit for the elves in a situation like this where they are so clearly outnumbered, because you can see that Mordor, the orcs, are always able to try and wrap around the elves in a situation like this. And with units like Minas Morgul Chosen, and especially the Temple Executioners, Mordor are going to be really difficult to get rid of from this flank. And it's not as if Mirkwood can try and cycle charge them from the rear, because of course Mordor have got their own cavalry force, although admittedly the Melkor's Chosen is just sort of standing there and taking a lot of range fire from the Thurny Tower. Melkor's Chosen of course very resilient, but even so, keeping that Mordor cavalry in check is going to be very important. Now, another really important engagement is going to be between Linden and Lothlorien, and actually it looks as though Lothlorien are going to have the better of it for the most part along this line. The Mithlon Swordmasters might be able to inflict a few more casualties than Lothlorien was hoping for, but especially with these Karas Kaladhon's Guardians here on the front line, Linden's attack on the front here is going to go south eventually. Now the Lothlorien warriors, not ideal against Linden, you know, they are certainly an AP focused unit, but even so, the numbers will help them out. There are also these pikemen around the flank, and over here actually Lothlorien are the ones wrapping around, so Mordor are wrapping around the allied forces over here, whereas Lothlorien going into the side from Linden over here. The Lothlorien Mounted Company are taking a lot of archer fire though from the 4 Linden archers in the back over there. Some 4 Linden scouts which are also hidden, so both units of scouts are on the field today. But you can see here, actually it looks as though Linden are going to have victory over here. That is surprising. I mean, the 4 Linden pikemen are a pretty good anchor, but with the presence of the Karas Kaladhon's Guardians, you would have expected Lothlorien to win this, with the Lothlorien blades in particular. We'll see. it could still turn around, but again, Linden are one of those well, probably the most contentious faction, to be honest with you. Riders of the Fold, getting caught in melee by a unit of Southron Lancers. They'll stand up a little bit better than most basic Horse Archers will, but they will of course still lose. The Mumakil are going crazy in here, dealing some pretty nasty damage to the Eastmark Horse Archers. Meanwhile, Aerith of Alberg going toe-to-toe with the Serpent Guard. Now that's a much more even fight, definitely two units of a very similar type, although the Mumakil might have something to say about the fight being even. You can see several of those horses die as the mighty Mumakil's tusks just go right through them. Now the Sons of Yule don't want to be caught with the Mumakil, because the Mumakil, if they do enter their attack animation, they will send the Sons of Yule into an early grave. The red shields are firing. And this is going to be the issue, I think, for Rohan is, yes, they're probably going to win this cavalry fight when all is said and done, but most of their lancers will have been expended and they'll only have horse archers, which means their ability to do hammer and anvil over here is going to be very limited, and you can see that there is a bit of tactical geometry going on, but, well, there goes the Linden General. The elves should still be able to stand and fight, but when you're up against this much cavalry, I think a bit of tactical geometry is allowed, especially from Khazad-dûm. Here we can see the Sons of Yule, the mighty Mumakil doing their best, but you would have to say the Mumakil will probably start to fall eventually. I'm actually a little bit surprised we're not seeing fire arrows to try and make them run amok, but nonetheless, this is still continuing over here. Khan's army is still holding position, sort of in an angry staring contest with Khazad-dûm. Units routing over in the background over there. That's Riddermark skirmishers as well. But yeah, Rohan's all-cavalry force is always going to be a bold move, and I think, honestly, they might have missed their chance to be the most effective that they could be earlier on against the elves. I mean, now you can see that the Mumakil is starting to fall. I did hear some javelins get thrown there. From the... there are some Riddermark skirmishers in here, I believe. Indeed there are. So the Mumakil won't die immediately to one javelin volley anymore, but under this sort of sustained pressure, they are starting to fall away regardless. But yeah, I feel as though this sort of Rohan cavalry would have probably been better against the elves instead of trying to take the Mumakil head on. We all know how well that will go, generally speaking. Lothlorien warriors going toe-to-toe with the Linden Marines. Spears in melee against AP infantry. It's kind of like a deceptive wet noodle contest over here. What is going on here then? So yeah, I guess, I mean, here where the Karasgaladhon's Guardians are, the line has sort of gone in favour of Lothlorien, slowly but surely. And Lothlorien warriors getting in and around the flank as well certainly not helped matters. And also some Thranduil Yerin, so Linden's infantry force is starting to struggle. They have lost half their men. Which I'm honestly not all that surprised about. The Galathan riders are still running around. They're multiple HP of course, so they have a little bit more survivability than most horse archers. And these Sylvan Rangers are still here, so if they can get a good firing position onto some sort of force, their body piercing will be very useful. In fact, the body piercing is going to probably be needed against Mordor. There are several engagements here. These Morale Halberds will not do all that well against Mirkwood's sort of lightly armoured, high damage units. But the Olag High are going to be causing havoc here in the back lines. The Thurny Tower are really going to struggle to bring them down in melee. They are, of course, absolute juggernauts in melee. The Roikabin Amon Lanka try and charge them to death. There are some Moran on guard over here as well. Now the Aradirith's high attack should actually be able to land some pretty effective hits on the heavily armoured Olag High. But over here, what happened to the Temple Inquisitors? I mean, I assume they're dead. I assume they must have been shot to death. I mean, there are a few Roikabin corpses over here as well, but the lack of a shield and the very heavy emphasis on archers here from Mirkwood must have been enough to bring them down. But the Melkor's Chosen are still up and running. They've taken some losses, but they are still largely in good enough shape to continue. And that's going to be bad, because the Melkor's Chosen, when they get rolling, they are really difficult to stop. And the Roikabin won't be a match for them in melee. I think the only thing which can beat them in melee 1-to-1 is the Champions of the White Hand from Isengard. And the Minas Morgul Chosen are over here with the Temple Executioners on foot. This is really the strong point of the Mordor infantry force. They have very tough spears in addition to very effective two-handed swordsmen. And most of what's over here is Thranduil Yerin as well, which with their malice against infantry they won't be able to get a lot of kills in return. But everywhere else, honestly, this has been a pretty good performance so far from Mirkwood and Lothlorien. It's still in the balance. that Olag Kai is still causing problems. If Mirkwood's skirmishers can get freed up, then I would definitely back them to win this. You can see over here the Lothlorien Mounted Company getting a nice rear charge here. So more and more this frontline engagement, those Karos Galadhon's Guardians have been very effective in this battle. I mean, in a free-for-all it is a bit of a risk to bring a very expensive pike unit like that a lot of the time, but it has worked here very nicely. As this battle continues, let's just go and take stock of what's going on over here. So ultimately Rohan are being forced to retreat.
They have lost half their men.
This hasn't really been a victory for either Rohan or Harad over here, although I think Harad will be slightly more happy with this. I mean, they have sacrificed all of their lancers and a lot of their Mumakil, but ultimately Rohan's cavalry force has been blunted pretty heavily, and they haven't really made any significant inroads into this very strong defensive position over here. Now, if they hold position from, I think ultimately Khazad-dûm and Harad will probably be the ones that are ganged up on in the late game, depending on how this goes. Over here, Lothlorien warriors, they're going to charge into the back, and of course with a high charge, shock infantry. They're fighting to the death actually, so Linden's forces starting to rout. Very well constructed front line from Lothlorien here. And that was Mordor's general as well. So again, the ROHIRRIM on Lank, 1-to-1 they would struggle against a unit like the Melkor's Chosen, but the support of the surrounding skirmish units from Mirkwood and Lothlorien has really helped them, and it's really made up for the fact that the Melkor's Chosen and the Temple Inquisitors are such monsters in melee. Some here Pang back there. These Olag Kai are still going though, only one of them has died, and they're inflicting pretty hefty casualties on the Thurney Tower. And there is still this Mordor force that they need to deal with, Moran on guard routing off. But as soon as Lothlorien's infantry is free, even the Temple Executioners are probably not going to be able to turn this around for Mordor. And as you can see, several positions on the Mordor-Linden alliance are starting to retreat. Unfortunately for Fuzzy Banjo, I feel as though a lot of his forces were very good targets in melee for the likes of the Hetherley Tower. Stuff like the Moran on Halberds are not really going to do a particularly good job against the Hetherley Tower unless they can stay in formation and keep them at arm's length with their phalanx. And that was never really going to happen with the sort of quick attack that they tried to pull off. Ultimately, I think that this fight went in favour of Lothlorien and Mirkwood, more from the good play of Lothlorien and Mirkwood than it did the bad play of Linden and Mordor. And Linden and Mordor are still somewhat alive. There is this High Elven catapult, there are still some 4 Linden archers and Harlinden guard, so the skirmishers of this army are still somewhat intact, although that probably won't last all that much longer. And over here we can see the Yaragwe Inanwe, Thranduil, who's holding his swords the wrong way because he's that edgy. The Orc archers are wavering as well. Now they would have probably got some decent kills across the battle, purely because I would imagine they weren't the primary target of a lot of the skirmishes when things really got going, and indeed you can see the Sylvan Rangers have been skirmished down pretty effectively, but at this point I think the damage has already been done. The Hetherley Tower have moved over here, so I think now actually we can probably go back up to full speed. Now these Temple Executioners could still take their toll on the Mirkwood infantry unless they are quickly and efficiently overwhelmed. Some Hiri Peng over there. Looks as though finally the Olag Kai are being brought down, and indeed the Aradirith are in there sort of leading the charge on that. Their AP certainly going to be a big help against the heavily armoured Olag Kai. Meanwhile, let's go and see what's happening over here. So Rohan once again are probing. This though I think is the problem with having a full cavalry force. It's that you are very one note in what you can do, and provided the enemy keeps their defensive positions strong, you're going to struggle to find your gaps. Now you do have the Riders of the Fold over here, so again this is very Pelennor Fields, this, with the horse archers trying to go after the Mumakil. But yeah, I feel as though this was probably the wrong target for Rohan and Khan to go after, because Khazad-dûm were here, and Khazad-dûm are going to be one of the most effective forces at forming up tactical geometry, and if you can do that, then you can effectively stop a full cavalry force like this. And also horse archers against the dwarves. I mean, horse archers can do good against lightly armoured targets, and indeed they are trying to focus down these First Legion pikes, but even the First Legion pikes have got a shield value and very heavy armour, so ultimately it probably wasn't the kind of composition that you'd want to take against Khazad-dûm. I think the Harajam cavalry force acquitted themselves quite well. Ashari Stalkers are also over here, so with that Ranger fire, if they manage to get some nice hits onto that blob of Rohan cavalry, it could be very bad for them. Now this is very bold here from the Arid of Aldberg, and they were going for the Demons of the Desert, but ultimately the Demons were able to get rid of them, and now those Arid of Aldberg immediately routing under the hailstorm of arrow fire that came their way. So let's go and see how this fight is wrapping up at this point. The skirmish position of Linden, essentially their final stand, has been engaged upon by Lothlorien. The Lothlorien blades are over here, as well as some Lothlorien warriors. And yeah, obviously Linden were never really going to stand a chance here when Lothlorien came for them. And this ultimately was a pretty good example of how effective Lothlorien can be in melee. And if you take away Linden's quality advantage on the front line, they start to look a little bit less scary. And obviously Lothlorien are one of the factions which can certainly do that. Mirkwood having a lot of success, and meanwhile Mirkwood, they have indeed gone to just completely overwhelm the Temple Executioners, which is the right move, the most efficient way of doing things. Just trying to kill them off before they can make much more of a dent in the Mirkwood forces. Very good play here. I'm impressed by Mirkwood and Lothlorien's play here so far. And they're two factions which don't really make up for one another's weakness, because they share quite a lot of the same weaknesses. But they have proven themselves to be very effective with one another with regards to their very high damage infantry and archers. Meanwhile, again the Rohan forces are still trying to sort of find gaps, and indeed they are. I mean, they're charging in here, trying to do damage here on the Trollmen, which they do manage. Riders of the Fold, however, very low charge on horse archers, the minimum charge in fact. And actually this is enough to rout quite a lot of them. I mean, they are going into impossible odds here. There's a lot of crossfire here from the Harad archers as well. The Riders of the Fold, very meek charge here, but at this point they're just trying to get what kills they can, but maybe a bit of a mistake. I mean, this is very overzealous, and I think at this point Master Blaster is probably realising that his army composition was not the best choice for going up against Khazad-dûm in particular. But also Harad has complemented Khazad-dûm's tactical geometry very well with some of their units, like their Rangers, their Cavalry, and their Demons of the Desert. And just their basic archers, honestly. The Riders of the Fold are coming in for another bite of the cherry. Although if those Trollmen had just turned around, they would probably butcher the Riders of the Fold in melee, to be honest with you. What are these Mumakil doing? Are they running amok? They're reforming. Now they're moving. Slowly but surely just pushing. There we go, that's what we like to see from the Mumakil. When they finally enter their attack animation, which is rarer than you might think, they're able to do huge amounts of damage. Rajam archers taking a lot of damage. What have Rohan actually got left cavalry-wise? First Marshal's Bodyguard, Riddermark Skirmishers, Sons of Yule, Red Shields, Arid of Aldberg. So they do have some Lancers, but not in as good a condition as they once were. At this point, what's going on? Ashari Stalkers? Now this is an interesting move. Harad's forces are going on the attack of Khan's infantry, which, I mean, their infantry is going to get absolutely massacred by the Trollmen and the Serpent Guard. But this does leave them somewhat open to Khan's cavalry, which is still in perfect condition. They were not part of the attack from Rohan, and of course these horse archers are still going to be able to do their damage as well. Champions of Nafarat moving forward. Bold move this from Harad. It also actually leaves a lot of gaps for what's left of Rohan's cavalry to come in and try and do some damage. Although with how much damage they've already taken, honestly it's probably not going to be as scary as you might think. Another Mumakil falls, this time to the Red Shields. However, the Dwarven infantry should be strong enough, I think. I mean, the First Marshal's Bodyguard and the Sons of Yule will inflict damage, but I mean, this is a gamble. I approve, actually, from Harad and the Dwarves. It's a very bold move. I don't know whether it's going to pay off as well as maybe they were hoping, because of course, when you advance like this, it does leave gaps for the cavalry, and Khans still have plenty with which to do damage. I'm actually a little bit surprised that the Brotherhood of the Lance have not moved in to do their grisly work. And actually with the Trollmen and the Haradrim Spearmen here on the front with their jagged spears, they're going to be able to easily cut their way through the nomadic light infantry, and trollmen are just going to... It's like a hot knife through butter. Variag Wind Riders are over here. Now they're in melee against the trollmen. They want to cycle out of there as quickly as they possibly can. What's going on with Rohan? Rohan's forces sort of trying to cycle in and out as best they can. A routing unit of Riddermark skirmishers. Now the Nurad Windblades are coming in here, but they are in full view of the archer forces, which is one of their real weaknesses. And they're going into the Serpent Guard, a pretty efficient charge there. Fortunately, however, Khan do have 2 units of Nurad Windblades, very greedy indeed. What's going on here with Rohan's cavalry? So yeah, they've cycled out over there. The Red Shields are cycling in, but their charge is not huge. They only have a charge of 5, I believe, as melee cavalry. Hammers of Gundabad, as well as the 4th Legion. Mithlon Lancers are coming over here, so technically speaking, Lyndon is still alive. The Lyndon-Mordor alliance. Although how alive that would be, I'm not quite so sure, because as soon as... If they were to go up against Khan in the late game with 1 unit of cavalry, then it would be all over for them. Medusald Guard, the 1 unit of Rohan infantry that was on the field. And obviously the champions of Nafarat are just having a field day over here against the very bargain basement Khandish infantry that was deployed. Just stomping them into the dirt. The Variag Bowmen, you know, they've got decent armour and shield values, but they're going to be no match at all for the champions of Nafarat, one of the more brutal shock infantry units in the game. And you can see as well that the Trollmen just punched right through the Khandish infantry. So this could yet pay off. I mean, honestly, the Khandish infantry is falling apart so quickly that the opportunities for their cavalry is probably dwindling.
Defeat seems almost certain.
Not sure what Rohan is doing at this stage. 1st Legion pikes being left behind, the Orc Hunters are here. Interestingly enough, the Lyndon cavalry is coming to the aid of the besieged Khandish and Rohan forces, charging their Mithlon Lancers into the Orc Hunters, doing a little bit more damage, preventing their archer companies from advancing forward. At this point, I would say that the Elves are probably in a pretty good place to go on to win this, because Harad and Khazad-dûm's infantry is taking damage on the approach from archers and cavalry charges, but they should be victorious over here. The cavalry is honestly such a wild card though, because Rohan and Khan could technically scatter to the 4 corners of the map, allow Harad and Khazad-dûm to fight the elves, and then just sort of pick and choose their targets. And honestly, Khan still have a pretty decent amount of cavalry left, and obviously there's still those hidden units of Eastmark scouts over there. So it's all a little bit crazy at this point. I've got no idea who's going to win this. If I were to put my money on someone at this point, oh, that's a lot of dwarven units still. There goes Harad's general. But with the champions of Nafarat and the Trollmen around, you can't imagine that they would break. There's those Variag Horse Archers as well. And the Horse Archers probably want to stay away from the Haradrim Spearman. That's one way to give very cheap spears some pretty hefty cost efficiency. And there's also champions of Nafarat in there, and with their giant swords they're going to be dismounting those horsemen and just butchering them on the ground. Medusald Guard will be able to defeat these very bloody Trollmen as well. Very, very effective in melee. Not quite as strong as the Hornburg Sentries in melee, but they make up for that with their javelins, of course. Brotherhood of the Lance are routing. Now, I don't know how many charges they got off, but they are, of course, potentially one of the most devastating Lancer units on the field. It would be a real shame for Khan if they weren't able to lay down all that effectiveness. Now, over here, there's a lot of Red Shield corpses. I don't know where the rest of the Rohan cavalry has gone. It looks as though it's way down there. And indeed, the Rohan cavalry is, I guess, trying to cycle to go and attack the rear of the Elven forces, which is interesting. And the Khandish cavalry is also out here on the flank, so ultimately what I said may very well come to pass. It may very well be Harad and Khazad-dûm going up against the Sylvan Elf Alliance, with the remaining cavalry from Khan and Rohan acting as an irritant to both sides and hoping to sweep up the victory in the late game. Still some individual units here that have scattered to the 4 winds. The Brotherhood of the Lance have returned, and they've immediately decided that what they should do is charge headlong into Spearman, which is a real waste. Especially now that the Sons of the Fallen are here, so they're routing once again. I mean, at this point, I'm not sure how much ammunition the Elven forces have left, and honestly the Elves are looking a little bit thin on the ground. They've got some individual units of real quality though. I don't know. It's gonna be tricky for the Elves, I think, because well, a lot of archers. They've got some AP in there as well, both from the Aradirith, and I think there are still a few units of Lothlorien warriors. Indeed, there are. And they do still have some archer some archer ammunition as well. And I would assume that this is going to be a case of these two units trying to bleed one another. Based on how long there is in the battle, I assume Rohan and Khand are going to try and utilise their cavalry for all it's worth. This nomadic light infantry is going up against this ROHIRRIM spearman unit, and they're going to win as well. 1-to-1, the nomadic light infantry will defeat them. It's a very interesting dynamic that has developed in this battle. What's left of the ROHIRRIM cavalry is coming in now. Sylvan Rangers. Iri Peng taking some fire. Don't know how much ammunition the Orc Hunters have. I would assume it's more than the Elves have got. This could be a devastating blow potentially from Rohan if they choose to follow through on this charge. This first Marshal's bodyguard is going directly for the Yaragwe Inanwe, but the Sylvan Staff Masters are going to accept the charge in place of their General's bodyguard unit. And now the Nanwaith are going to try and get into melee. I don't think that's going to be enough to bring down any of the First Marshal bodyguard though. What is going on over here? Sons of Yall and the Red Shields are going to move back to try and disrupt the Dwarven skirmish line. And also all of the Khandish forces are also going to move in to try and destroy them. This will be a pretty big loss for the Dwarves, honestly. Where did the Sons of Yall actually go? Oh, they went in here after the warriors of Khazad-dûm. That was very close to the Khazad-dûm reclaimers, however. You want to stay clear of those very deadly axe throwers. The First Legion pikes are going to be a really tough nut to crack here. Again, the Lothlorien warriors could do it, but they need to make sure that they remain out of the formation that's so dangerous. Now this is interesting. The Sons of Yall charge right into the Lothlorien warriors, and the AP damage causing several of those ROHIRRIM knights to fall. But this is going to be a difficult unit to take down. The Veriai Cataphracts are still in relatively good condition. Heavily armoured Cataphracts. There's also Nurad Windblades. Hashari Stalkers firing away at the Nurad Windblades. How is this frontline engagement going? Because this could determine a lot of how this battle goes. The Karas Kaladhon's Guardians are fighting, but actually with how many Dwarven pikemen there are, I think the Elves are going to find themselves in a really difficult situation here. Because also with units like the Mithril Guard, it's not as if the Dwarves have got a quality discrepancy either. So yeah, I think that the Elves are probably going to struggle here. The Dwarves, of course, didn't really take that much damage in the fighting. They had to deal with the Black Powder Hwacho, but it was Harad who dealt with who took most of the casualties from the ROHIRRIM. It's only now really that the Dwarves are having to deal with extensive pressure from the Rohan cavalry. The Red Shields again, not the highest charge, but at this point they're just trying to thin out the Dwarven ranks as best they can. This really is going to be a test of just how resilient the Dwarves of Khazad-dûm really are. Because they're going to need to go through what's left of the Elves, and then they're going to need to try and deal with the cavalry which is running around from Khand and Rohan. Because I've little doubt they will defeat the Elves unless there is some serious hammer and anvil. Well, those warriors are actually struggling a little bit against the Hetherly Tower. The basic Dwarven infantry is not doing too well against the Elves, but really the quality Dwarven units are just too many in number, I think. And the Karas Kaladhon's Guardians are not in the ideal position either. Their formation has been buckled by the Mithril Guard. And also over here, the First Legion is still very much alive. Got some Sons of the Fallen over here. Also, the First Marshal's bodyguard is behind the Meduzal Guard. Meduzal Guard is going to have a point-blank shot in here, and they are one of the more deadly javelins in the game. Colton's very resilient dwarves. And at this point they may as well try and attack into them. The Coundish archers trying to chip in with a bit of damage of their own. That might be the end of the ammunition that the Medusau Guard have. They seem to have pulled out their axes. Let's go back to the main event, shall we? The red shields are shaken, actually. They must have been in melee with something nasty. They might have gone too close to the pikes. There's also these Variag cataphracts. Thandra and Erin are still standing. But yeah, this Mithril Guard is really the cornerstone of this dwarven push through that Lothlorien pikeman. The Hatherley Tower have done really well for themselves throughout this entire battle. Going up against the basic dwarven units, and now, well, the Mordor units I should say, and now they're going up against the basic dwarven units, which is targets which they traditionally do quite well against. The red shields just trying to mop up what they can, where they can. Now the Eastmark scouts have revealed themselves. I don't know how effective they will be. There goes Thranduil. Ultimately, if the dwarves are able to mop this up quickly, they can just sort of go into a big blob with their pikes and their spears, and they should be able to hold out. So if Rohan and Khand are going to make their move, it's going to need to be now. First Marshal's bodyguard are getting very close to the Hammers of Gundamar, which I believe have got an anti-cavalry bonus. There's also 5 Sons of Yule left alive. Now, amusingly, the elves are actually going after the Rohirrim cavalry here. Which is interesting. I'm not sure whether the reaction on the ground to Rohan having a few more units of cavalry was maybe we should join together to bring down the Rohan cavalry, but I still think the dwarves are in too strong a position to lose this too heavily. It's not as if they've got any javelins left alive to crack a dwarven blob at this point. And the red shields have done a lot of cycle charging in this match. I don't know whether they've actually got more kills from being in melee than they have with their bows. Well, there goes Haldir. Both elven generals are now no longer with us. Murad Windblade's coming in again. It's the presence of the 4th Legion and the 1st Legion, which is it's going to make this incredibly difficult. I mean, a good charge can still rout them off. No doubt about that. And it is essentially just this pocket of dwarven resistance at this point. But it's the pikes. And there's a lot of AP in there as well. I do hope that the dwarves win this in a way. Because they've taken so much punishment already.
Good tidings. The enemy general lies dead.
Well, I would assume
Behold how our cowardly foe
that that's the
runs.
dwarves.
It's time to press the attack.
One army is fully broken from the field. These charges have been pretty effective, so yeah, I think probably at this point Rohan and Khand have managed to pull it around. There's nothing else really on the field. I'll say that, there's still some Sons of the Fallen over there against the Medusau Guard, but they're going to lose.
Behold how our cowardly foe runs. It's time to press the attack.
Yeah?
The battle seems to be swinging in our favour. From such tidings
I
of victory
think
emerge.
this is going to be it. This is going to be enough. There's one Warden of Alos Tyrion over there from Linden, which is probably why this battle is going to take so much longer. A good stand from the dwarves, but good use of the cavalry here. They charged from all angles and they won. And initially it wasn't going so well. I think the initial engagements from Rohan against Harad were not very favourable, but ultimately actually I think maybe as much as I approve of charging across the field in the way that Harad and Khazad-dûm ended up doing, it was ultimately to their detriment, because so many gaps appeared and they ultimately allowed the cavalry to have the advantage that it did. So ultimately I'm hesitant to... It's good cavalry play, but I think ultimately Harad and Khazad-dûm may have dug their own grave earlier on in the battle. I thought that the Dwarven Resilience would have been enough to carry them through here, but ultimately I was mistaken. This, I think, is I don't think that I can give Lyndon a second place based on just this one dude over here. Honestly, at this point you may as well admit defeat. There's a lot of admit defeats coming. This one dude is not hitting the stakes there. I mean, come on. No one likes to try hard to this extent. Trying to dance around the stakes and make them die that way. Little bit of an unfortunate way to end the game, but nonetheless a victory for the cavalry focus faction. I'm very sorry that the blue team won this battle again, but there is nothing I can do about it. So don't complain about that in the comments. Meanwhile, let's go and have a look at who did well and who didn't. Mordor and Lyndon, I think that it was a very good performance from Mirkwood and Lothlorien there to defuse them. Mirkwood in particular getting a lot of kills. Obviously their archers would have been very effective, particularly seeing as they were going primarily up against Mordor. Only 741 deployed from Rohan. Obviously most of that was cavalry. Initially their engagements weren't going too well, but in the late game I think the advance from Harad and Khazad-dûm ultimately allowed them to get their kills very efficiently. So see how the ROHIRRIM army did. Obviously knights are always going to get a lot of kills in an elongated battle like this, 301. Red Shield's getting 296 as well, so a lot of good kills from range and in melee for them. Other than that, nothing too special. The 1st Marshal's Bodyguard doing okay. The Eastmark Scouts revealed themselves at the end, but they ultimately weren't too effective. 121 kills from the Meduseld Guard as well, so the one unit of infantry did very well for themselves also. So yeah, possibly I'll be doing a separate video to announce what I might be doing in the future with something else related to Total War. I think I don't know whether I should just make the first quote-unquote episode of it and see how well it goes down, rather than saying what I'm going to do first, because an announcement video would only be like a minute long and it would be a rather pointless thing. So I don't know, I'll make my mind up about that relatively soon. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next, which in Reforged terms I do have a Dale siege in the pipeline, so we might be seeing that at some point.